Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to 15 Minutes with Lori. This morning, we've got some very important things that we're going to talk about. You may ask, why am I sharing my screen with the Code of Ethics and standard practice of the National Association of Realtors? This was updated January 1st, 2025. I'm sure we all pull that out from time to time and read it, right? If not, it is something that we need to be very diligent about, and we need to learn it. Today, I've got reason why I'm going to be talking about Article 1. But first and foremost, I'm going to go ahead and read the article, and then I'm going to explain what it truly means. And I'm not going to read all the standard of practice, just 1, 2. But beginning, when representing a buyer, seller, landlord, tenant, or other client as an agent, realtors pledge themselves to protect and promote the interests of that client. And remember, client is when they have signed either a buyer's exclusive agency agreement or a listing agreement with you. Those are the two ways that they can become a client with you. This obligation to the client is primary, but it does not relieve realtors of their obligation to treat all parties honestly. When serving a buyer, seller, landlord, tenant, or other party in a non-agency capacity, realtors remain obligated to treat all parties honestly. So let's say you are the listing agent and a buyer comes to you through, say, your open house, and they would like to buy the house, but they do not have an agent, nor do they want representation. Or if, let's say, they would consider representation, however, your seller does not want a dual agency relationship. They've told you that up front when you listed the property. So the buyer decides, you know what, I'm going to move forward and buy the property, even though nobody's representing me. So you are still assisting that potential buyer, okay, in a non-agency capacity. And you do have obligations to that customer as well. So standard practice 1, 2, the duties imposed by the Code of Ethics encompass all real estate related activities and transactions, whether conducted in person, electronically, or through any other means. The duties the Code of Ethics imposes are applicable whether realtors are acting as agents or in legally recognized non-agency capacities, except that any duty imposed exclusively on agents by law or regulation shall not be imposed by the Code of Ethics or realtors acting in a non-agency capacity. So it's both when you're representing a client and when you're assisting a customer in a non-agency capacity. As used in this Code of Ethics, client means the person or persons or entities with whom a realtor or a realtor's firm has an agency or legally recognized non-agency relationship. The customer means a party to a real estate transaction who receives information, services, or benefits, but has no contractual relationship with the realtor or the realtor's firm. Prospect means a purchaser, seller, tenant, or landlord who is not subject to a representation relationship with the realtor or realtor's firm. Agent means a real estate licensee, including brokers and sales associates acting in an agency relationship as defined by state law or regulation. And broker means a real estate licensee, including brokers and sales associates acting as an agent or in a legally recognized non-agency capacity. Okay. Went through that. I'm sure you all have understand it, and it's clear as mud, correct? So in other words, it spells out what the agency relationships are and how they work, okay? So let's say you have the listing, and it doesn't matter if it is commercial, residential, vacant land, farms and acreage, doesn't matter what type of property it is. If you are the listing agent, prior to closing, that buyer, that purchaser, regardless if they are a client or a non-agency related individual, that you are acting on their part, they still deserve a final walkthrough. Okay, now you might think, why land? Because there could be something on that land that is problematic. We had an issue years ago where a buyer who was not being, actually was being represented, and I'll get back to the non-agency relationship, but this buyer was being represented, and the contract was written up to state that the tires on the vacant property were to be removed. Okay, didn't say who was to remove them, doesn't say by when. After closing, the buyer went out there, found that there was a pile of tires there. And so they went back to the seller and said, hey, why are the tires still here? And they said, well, it said they weren't included in the sale, so they didn't collect any funds for it, didn't tell anybody who to remove it. So the buyer's agent ended up going out and removing the mound of tires that were infested with snakes, mice, mold. It was an awful situation. So it did cost money to that buyer's agent, who basically had to take their commission, their compensation, turn it over to this task that they had to do. So everyone deserves a right for a final walkthrough. Okay, so let me get back to the non-agency related buyer that you could potentially have. It is your obligation to treat them fair and honest, so they deserve the right to do a final walkthrough. Okay, if they say, oh heck, I was in it just 2 weeks ago, I don't want to do a final walkthrough, you have the responsibility to say, anything could happen within that time frame, and it doesn't matter what type of property it is. Okay, they still have a right to do a final walkthrough. And then if they say, absolutely not, I don't need one, we all know, or should know, that the final walkthrough notice is vital. It's vital for any reason. So every buyer deserves a final walkthrough prior to closing within that 4-day window. And whether they do one or not, we need to see that final walkthrough notice signed off on. Okay, so they need to sign off on it, even if they did not do a final walkthrough, saying that you have given them every opportunity to do so and they decline. So you're going to check line number 6 where it says buyer acknowledges having waived the opportunity to conduct a final walkthrough of the property. They sign it, you're done. Okay. However, if they do a final walkthrough and they say, I think everything looks good, you check line number 7, they sign it, and all is good. If something has gone wrong, or let's say the seller did not make the repairs that they stated that they agreed in writing to do per the inspection notice, you're going to check line number 8 and fill out lines 12, 13, and 14. If you need additional lines, you would need to do an addendum to the final walkthrough notice. Okay, but also if there's anything that is now wrong that no one saw before, maybe the AC isn't working, maybe, there's water in the basement, maybe a light switch doesn't work all of a sudden and it wasn't noted in the inspection notice. Some things can happen between the time of that inspection and closing. The inspector only warrants it at the moment that they do the inspection. They do not warrant it any day after that. Okay, so everything can turn off like a light switch. All right, light fixtures could quit working, the furnace could quit working, maybe a storm came through and something happened to the roof and now water is coming in. So things can happen. All right, so this final walkthrough is vital. Is there any questions that anybody has? Okay, I must have done a really good job. Norm is with me.
I have a question.
Yes.
What if they find something wrong during the walkthrough and the seller doesn't want to do it? What options does the buyer have?
Mm-hmm. So it depends on what type of issue it is. So ordinary wear and tear obviously are acceptable because it states that in the contract. But if there is something that the seller will not repair, And if it is in writing between buyer and seller from the inspection notice, the contract clearly states on there that closing does not relieve the seller of their obligation to make any repairs or any agreements that they have made within that contract. Also, if they're refusing to fix anything, the buyer has a couple of different options. They could potentially get out of the contract if they don't want to move forward. Now, if they want to move forward, they could either ask the seller for a monetary adjustment of the sale price and the buyer take care of it later, or they could ask the seller, would you be willing to do it? We would never recommend this, but it's an option. Would you be willing to do it after closing, but then there would be funds that would be escrowed with the title company in order to do that? Or you could bump back the closing date and try to negotiate with the seller to take care of the issue. So there's a couple of different issues or a couple of different options that the buyer would have. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but I think if they elect to get out of the contract, they really need to seek legal advice, because nowhere in the contract or in the building or the walkthrough does it say they have the right to get out of the contract. Right? So if they want to get out of the contract, they really need to get legal advice.
I think at that point, we as realtors can get on the phone with other realtors, and this goes beyond the non-agency capacity. But if you're dealing with another realtor in the transaction, call them, talk to them, ask them, what is the seller willing to do? Try to negotiate it out. And in the end, if the buyer wants out, put together a mutual release, submit it, because sometimes when it's in front of them in writing, they will sign it. Not always, but Norma's right. The final walkthrough notice gives no reason for anyone to get out of the contract. However, seeking legal counsel if ultimately they want out, if there is a really big issue, would be important to give them. So, Bill, do you have any comments this morning?
I just want to add on the final walkthrough. Just came across this the other day. Did the final walkthrough like 3 days prior to closing. Got there was a note on the front door from the city saying that they have a violation because the grass hasn't been cut. And when the buyers went to go get their permit, they were not allowed to get their permit until that grass was cut. So we had to reach out to the agent. He had to get their landscaping group out there to get it done. But if we didn't do a final walkthrough, we would have not known and closed, and then they would have to deal with the situation.
Wow. Yeah, that's a good point. And so the contract with the government inspections, if they can't get occupancy, that would be required by the seller to take care of. So that's a really good scenario, because anything happens, guys, anything, and we need to be ready to help. Now, if you are representing the seller in a transaction and you are assisting a buyer as a non-agency relationship, it's your obligation to explain to them, all the ramifications if they don't fix items, kind of all the what ifs. So they need to know you're not representing them, so you can't give them advice, but you can set the right expectations for them. Okay. We're at our 15 minutes. If anybody has any further questions, reach out to us anytime. And I hope you all have a great day. And don't forget about the Matrix training for Coldwell Banker Premier Group on Friday at 10. I sent out the link yesterday. I'll send it out again probably today and maybe even tomorrow, so you don't forget. So everybody have a wonderful day. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye, everyone.